We're trying to portable Thoreau up to the internet, to YouTube, by making him portable on YouTube. By reading him into it, then you don't have to carry the portable book. Then, and I'm reading it because I speak Midland, which is a version of Chicago English, because I was born in Ohio, and that's the standard, so we don't want any of that East Coast stuff. So I'm reading standard English, like CBS News out of Chicago. I have heard of a man lost in the woods and dying of famine and exhaustion at the foot of a tree, whose loneliness was relieved by the grotesque visions with which, owing to bodily weakness, his diseased imagination surrounded him, and which he believed to be real. So also, owing to bodily and mental health and strength, we may be continually cheered by a like but more normal and natural society, and come to know that we are never alone. We're not alone technically in nature, right? We've got bugs and birds and trees. I have a great deal of company in my house, especially in the morning when nobody goes. Let me suggest a few comparisons that as someone may convey an idea of my situation. I am no more lonely than the loon in the pond that laughs aloud, or than Walden's pond itself. What company has that lonely lake? I pray, ? And yet it has not the blue devils, but the blue angels in it, and in the azure tint of its waters. The sun is alone, except in thick weather, when there sometimes appear to be two, but one is a mock sun. Do you like those planets that have like two suns? They say like there's planetary systems where there's two suns.
Yeah, but we already have warming of the planet with one sun.
Well, we're already warming up too much.
We have to be farther away.
There's one astronomer was saying it would be nice. It's a nice situation to have two, if they're just right, if the two suns. God is alone, but the devil, he is far from being alone. God, the devil's not alone. God is alone. God is alone, but the devil is far from being alone. He sees a great deal of company. He is a legion. I am no more lonely than a single million or dandelion in the pasture, or a bean leaf, or a sorrel, or a horsefly, or a humblebee. I am no more lonely than the millbrook, or the weathercock, or the north star, or the south wind, or an April shower, or a January thaw, or the first spider in my new house. Are you saying that that's mystical, his union with all creation? That he's a mystic? Is that what you're trying to say?
He's a
Naturalistic mystic. I have occasional visits in the long winter evenings when the snow falls fast and the wind howls in the wood from our old settler and original proprietor, who is reported to have dug Walden Pond and stoned it and fringed it with pine woods, who tells me stories of old time and of new eternity, and between us we managed to pass a cheerful evening with social mirth and pleasant views of things, even without apples or cider. A most wise and humorous friend, whom I love much, he keeps himself more secret than ever did Gaffey or Whaley, and though he is thought to be dead, none can show where he is buried. An elderly dame, too, dwells in my neighborhood, invisible to most persons, in whose odorous herb garden I love to stroll sometimes, gathering samples. simples and listening to her fables, for she has a genius of unequaled fertility, and her memory runs back farther than mythology, and she can tell me the origin of every fable and on what fact every one is founded, for the incidents occurred when she was young. A ruddy and lusty old dame who delights in all weathers and seasons is likely to outlive all her children yet. We're reading in the section of solitude within Walden. The indescribable innocence and beneficence of nature, of sun and wind and rain and summer and winter, such health, such cheer they afford forever, and such sympathy have they ever with our race, that all nature will be affected, and the sun's brightness fade, and the winds would sigh humanely, and the clouds rain tears, and the woods shed their leaves, and put on mourning in midsummer, if any man should ever be a just cause grieve. Shall I not have intelligence with the earth, and am I not partly leaves and vegetable mold myself? Do you think he's vegetable mold?
Part of everything. Don't we have iron? We are iron. We are hydrogen, oxygen, all the
If we eat vegetables, do we?
We have to continually nourish them.
Are we made out of
Your
vegetables?
vitamins, so you have to eat your vitamins. So you have to nourish everything that you are.
We're made out of stardust.
You have to take the minerals.
I feel like I'm just a bunch of dust from a star. What is the pill which will keep us well? Do you know of a magic pill? What is the pill which will keep us well, serene, contented? Not my or thy great-grandfather's, but our great-grandmother Nature's universal vegetable botanic medicines, by which she has kept herself young always, outlived so many old pars in her day, and fed her health with their decaying fatness. Yeah, it seems nature is regenerative, and it seems for my panacea, instead of one of those quack vials of a mixture dipped from Acheron and the Dead Sea, which come out of those long, shallow, black schooner-looking wagons which we sometimes see made to carry bottles, let us have a draught of undiluted morning air. Yeah, I was saying, like, fresh food is like better than like getting goji berries from Tibet. Do you think we should eat goji berries from Tibet, or just have fresh apples from the local orchard? Morning air, if man will not drink of this at the fountainhead of the day, then why then we must even bottle up some and sell it in the shops for the benefit of those who have lost their subscription ticket to morning time in this world. But remember, it will not keep quite till noonday, even in the coolest cellar, but drive out the stopples long ere that, and follow westward the steps of Aurora. I am no worshipper of Hygienia, who was the daughter of that old herb doctor Aesculapius.
Yeah, that means health. Is the daughter of the
Aesculapius, a herb doctor?
The ancient Greek doctor, the first doctor.
First one? Yeah, I'm not quite familiar with the herb doctor, but who is represented on monuments holding a serpent in one hand, and in the other a cup out of which the serpent sometimes drinks, but rather of Hebe, cupbearer to Jupiter, who was the daughter of Juno, and wild lettuce, and who had the power of restoring gods and men to the vigor of youth. If we eat wild lettuce, will that restore us? What's he saying there? But rather, it is represented in holding a serpent, and in the other a cup out of which the serpent sometimes drinks. But rather, Hebe, cupbearer to Jupiter, who was the daughter of Juno and wild lettuce, who had the power of restoring gods and men to the vigor of youth. What did he say in that statement? I am no worshipper. He's no worshipper of Hygeia, who was the daughter of that old herb doctor, Aesculapius, who is represented on the monuments, holding a serpent in hand. So he prefers just wild lettuce over some herbal concoction, right? He says instead of going to the health food store and getting a...
He doesn't say that.
He does.
Back then everything was starchy.
He said eat wild lettuce. I'm just treating into it what I want to get out of it.
He's got some more mythological field, you know that.
I'm just trying to force my opinion upon the book by manipulatively reading it. He was probably only thoroughly sound, conditioned, healthy, robust, and young lady that ever walked the globe. She was probably the only Henry David Thoreauly sound. She was probably the only thoroughly sound, conditioned, healthy, and robust young lady that ever walked the globe, and whenever she came, it was spring. We're talking about now Hebe, Hebe, cupbearer of Jupiter, who was the daughter of Juno. The daughter of Juno, Hebe. Do you know all of your gods? Hebe, the daughter of Juno. She was probably the only thoroughly... Henry David Thoreau. Thoroughly sound, conditioned, healthy, robust young lady that ever walked the globe, and wherever she came it was spring. And she was the one with the wild lettuce. So she's saying.
So she brought spring everywhere.
Yeah. I don't know.
Mythology.
We have to read Greek mythology now. Now that's the end of solitude. It ended there. The next section is visitors. I think that I love society as much as most, and am ready enough to fasten myself like a bloodsucker for the time to any full-blooded man that comes in my way. I am naturally no hermit. The biography says Thoreau is not a hermit in the woods at all, because he's like a writer, and you'll see he was socially engaged. I am naturally no hermit, but might possibly sit out the sturdiest frequenter of the barroom, or in my business called me thither. He also had a pencil business. I had 3 chairs in my house, 1 for solitude, 2 for friendship, and 3 for society. When visitors came in larger and unexpected numbers, there was but the 3rd chair for them all, but they generally economized the room by standing up. It is surprising how many great men and women a small house will contain. I have had 25 or 30 souls with their bodies at once under my roof, and yet we often parted without being aware that we had come very near to one another. Many of our houses, both public and private, with their most innumerable apartments, their huge halls, and their cellars for the storage of wines and other munitions of peace, appear to me extravagantly large for their inhabitants. They are so vast and magnificent that the latter seem to be only vermin which infest them. I am surprised when the herald blows his sermons before some Tremont or Astor or Middlesex house to see come creeping out over the piazza, for all inhabitants a ridiculous mouse. which soon again slinks into some hole in the pavement. Do you think there's more mice living in the houses than people?
Somehow.
One inconvenience I sometimes experienced in so small a house, the difficulty of getting to a sufficient distance from my guest when we begin to utter the big thoughts in big words. We want room for you, you want rooms for your thoughts to get into sailing trim and to run a course or two before they make their port. The bullet of your thought must have overcome its lateral and ricochet motion and fallen into its last and steady course before it reaches the ear of the hearer, else it may plow out again through the side of his head. This is very Thoreauian writing, I guess. It's journaling. This is like writing in your journal all the time. Would you write stuff like that in your journal? Also, our sentences want room to unfold and form their columns in the interval. Individuals, like nations, must have suitable broad and natural boundaries, even a considerable neutral ground between them. He's talking about boundaries now. He's talking about visitors in society, and like you have boundaries. You set boundaries. I have found it a singular luxury to talk across the pond to a companion on the opposite side. In my house we were so near that we could not begin to hear. We could not speak low enough to be heard, as when you throw two stones into calm water so near that they break each other's undulations. If we are merely loquacious and loud talkers, then we can afford to stand very near together, cheek by jowl, and feel each other's breath. But if we speak reservedly and thoughtfully, we want to be farther apart, that all animal heat and moisture may have a chance to evaporate. If we would enjoy the most intimate society with that in each of us which is without or above being spoken to, we must not only be silent, but commonly so far apart bodily that we cannot possibly hear each other's voice in any case. Referred to this standard speech is for the convenience of those who are hard of hearing, but there are many fine things which we cannot say if we have to shout. As the conversation began to assume a loftier and grander tone, we gradually shoved our chairs further apart till we touched the wall in opposite corners, and commonly there was not room enough. See, I have a thing about singing, like if you have to sing very loud and have this huge breath control and sing like in an opera house. It's different than having a soft voice and singing a solo in a soiree setting within a small house in Paris with Chopin playing with Chopin. So I believe in the soiree for music.
It was not true. He was supposed to sing for thousands of people.
I don't like that. They train that the voice teachers at the music schools teach the singers to train to sing to 100,000 people at the back of the auditorium. And so the voice is too loud. So, so I perfected where the completely untrained and shallow, scratchy voice. That's the way I sing, with no breath control at all. Just terrible. Out of pitch. They have some rock and roll singers, they have these terrible voices. So I believe in...
Like Louis Armstrong.
I forgot some of the names. Louis Armstrong, yeah, he's got a
French they have
scratchy voice.
He has also scratchy voice. But you see, they like that voice.
Yeah.
It's a different type of voice. It's not that
I just
It was
resented it.
loud.
They told me to breathe from my diaphragm. So, mhm.
Your
not,
sheep figure, yes.
I'm not going to breathe from my diaphragm. I want a soft voice. My best room, however, my withdrawing room, always ready for company, on whose carpet the sun rarely fell, was the pine wood behind my house. But thither in summer days, when distinguished guests came, I took them, and a priceless domestic swept the floor and dusted the furniture and kept the things in order. In one guest house came, he sometimes partook of my frugal meal. If one guest came, he sometimes partook of my frugal meal, and it was no interruption to conversation to be stirring a hasty pudding, or watching the rising and maturing of a loaf of bread in the ashes in the meanwhile. But if 20 came and sat at my house, there was nothing said about dinner, though there might be bread enough for two, more than if eating were a forsaken habit. But we naturally practiced abstinence, and this was never felt to be an offence against hospitality, but the most proper and considerable course. The waste and decay of physical life, which so often needs repair, seemed miraculously retarded in such a case, and the vital vigor stood its ground. I could entertain thus 1,000 as well as 20, and if any ever went away, disappointed or hungry, from my house, when they found me at home, they may depend upon it that I sympathized with them at least. So easy is it, though many housekeepers doubt it, to establish the new and better customs in the place of the old. You need not rest your reputation on the dinners you give. For my own part, I was never so effectually deterred from frequenting a man's house by any kind of Cerberus whatever, as by the parade one made about dining me, which I took to be very polite and roundabout hint never to trouble him so again. I think I shall never revisit those scenes. You think it should be like Downton Abbey, and you have to put on a tuxedo to come to dinner and come exactly on time at 6 p.m. Hmm?
I don't like that.
Do you like formal English dinners? I should be proud to have for the motto of my cabin those lines of Spenser which one of my visitors inscribed on a yellow walnut leaf for a card. Quote, arrived there, the little house they fill. They look for entertainment where none was. Rest is their feast, and all the things at their will. The noblest mind the best contentment has. Well, if you have a noblest mind, the best contentment has. Yeah, well, that's a very Zen thing. That's got like wabi and sabi. That's very Zen. Do you think?
I don't mind.
Hmm.
It's superior, absolutely.
Hmm.
You learn something, you understand something, you enjoy something.
Like if I read a little bit from Zen, this mentions Thoreau. Here we have an appreciation of transcendental aloofness in the midst of multiplicities, which is known as wabi, W-A-B-I, in the Dictionary of Japanese Culture terms. Wabi really means poverty, or negatively, not to be in the fashionable society of the time. To be poor, that is, not to be dependent on things worldly, wealth, power, and reputation, and yet to feel inwardly the presence of something of the highest value, above time and social position. This is what essentially constitutes wabi. W-A-B-I, stated in terms of practical everyday life, wabi is to be satisfied with a little hut, a room of 2 or 3 tatami mats, like the log cabin of Thoreau. Now he mentions, we're reading about Thoreau within Zen, within Suzuki. To be wabi is to be satisfied with a little hut, a room of 2 or 3 tatami mats, like the log cabin of Thoreau, and with a dish of vegetables picked in the neighboring fields, and perhaps to be listening to the patter of a gentle spring rainfall. While later I will say something more about wabi, let me state here that the cult of wabi has entered deeply into the cultural life of the Japanese people. It is in truth the worshipping of poverty, probably a more appropriate cult in a poor country like ours, despite the modern Western luxuries and comforts of life which have invaded us. There is still an irreducible longing in us for the cult of wabi, even in the intellectual life, not richness of ideas, but brilliancy or solemnity in marshalling thoughts and building up philosophical system is sought, but just to stay quietly content with the mystical contemplation of nature and to feel at home with the world is more inspiring to us, at least to some of us. I was reading from Zen. That's another opinion, I guess. That's, and they mentioned Thoreau. Huh. The noblest mind the greatest contentment has. When Winslow, afterward governor of the Plymouth colony, went with a companion on a visit of ceremony to Wassasat on foot through the woods, and arrived tired and hungry at his lodge, they were well received by the king, but nothing was said about eating that day. When the night arrived, to quote their own words, he laid us on the bed with himself and his wife, they at the one end and we at the other. I, being only plank, laid a foot from the ground and a thin mat upon them. 2 more of his chief men for a room pressed by and upon us, so that we were worse weary of our lodging than of our journey. At 1 o'clock the next day, Massa brought 2 fishes that he had shot, about thrice as big as a bream. These being boiled, they were at least 40, looked for a share in them, the most 8 of them. The meal only we had in 2 nights and a day, and had not one of us brought a partridge, we had taken our journey fasting, fearing that they would be light-headed for want of food, and also sleep, owing to the savages' barbarous singing, for they used to sing themselves asleep, and that they might get home while they had strength to travel, they departed. As for lodging, it is true that they were but poorly entertained, though what they found inconvenience was no doubt intended for an honor, but as far as eating was concerned, I do not see how the Indians could have done better. They had nothing to eat themselves, and they were wiser than to think that apologies could supply the place of food to their guests. So they drew their belts tighter and said nothing about it. Another time, when Winslow visited them, it being a season of plenty with them, there was no deficiency in this respect. As for men, they will hardly fail one and anywhere. I had more visitors while I lived in the woods than at any other period in my life. I mean that I had some. I met several there under most favorable circumstances than I could anywhere else. But fewer came to see me on trivial business. In this respect, my company was winnowed by my mere distance from town. I had withdrawn so far within the great ocean of solitude, into which the rivers of society empty, that for the most part, so far as my needs were concerned, only the finest sentiment was deposited around me. Besides, there were wafted to me evidences of unexplored and uncultivated continents on the other side. Who should come to my lodge this morning but a true Homeric, or Pythagorean man, and he had so suitable and poetic a name that I am sorry I cannot print it here. A Canadian, a woodchopper and postmaker, who can hold 50 posts in a day. You know what a postmaker is? You know what a post is. He's like putting the fences or pieces of wood in the ground. A woodchuck, a postmaker who could hold 50 posts in a day, who made his last supper on a woodchuck, which his dog caught. You know, my father had a dog, and I have a picture of him. He actually caught woodchucks, and he dragged them back to the house, and there was a woodchuck catcher, and I have a picture of him looking out over the field, looking at, I think, a woodchuck, or looking at deer and things. He would stare out over the horizon, looking at animals. What was his name? Dad's dog. I have a picture. The woodchuck which his dog caught, he too has heard of Homer, and if it were not for books, would not know what to do rainy days, though perhaps he has not read one wholly through for many rainy seasons. Some priest, who could pronounce the Greek itself, taught him to read his verse in the Testament in his native parish far away, and now I must translate to him while he holds the book. Achilles' reproof to Patroclus for his sad countenance, quote, "Why are you in tears, Patroclus, like a young girl, ? Quote, or have you alone heard some news from Phthia? They say that Menœtius lives yet, son of Actor, and Peleus lives, son of Aelicus, among the Myrmidons, either of whom having died, we should greatly grieve." He says, that's good. He has a great bundle of white oak bark under his arm for a sick man gathered this Sunday morning. Quote, I suppose there's no harm in going after such a thing today, says he. To him Homer was a great writer, though what his writing was about he did not know. This is what basically I know. I'm led to believe that Homer was a great writer, but I don't know what he wrote because I haven't read it. Does that make me not know? Then why do I think he's a great writer? Other people thought he was a great writer. A more simple and natural man it would be hard to find. Vice and disease, which cast such a somber moral hue over the world, seemed to have hardly any existence for him. He was about 28 years old and had left Canada and his father's house a dozen years before to work in the States and earn money to buy a farm, with at last, perhaps in his native country, he was cast in the coarsest mould, a stout but sluggish body, yet gracefully carried, with a thick sunburned neck, dark bushy hair, and a dull sleepy blue eyes, which were occasionally lit up with expression. He wore a flat grey cloth cap, a dingy wool-colored greatcoat, and cowhide boots. He was a great consumer of meat, usually carrying his dinner to his work a couple of miles past my house, for he chopped all summer in a teeny pail cold meats, often cold woodchucks, and coffee in a stone bottle which dangled by a string from his belt. And sometimes he offered me a drink. He came along early, crossing my bean field, though without anxiety or haste to get to his work, such as Yankees exhibit. Haste to get to his work, such as Yankees exhibit. Do you think Yankees exhibit a haste to get to work? You know what a Yankee is? He wasn't a-going to hurt himself. He didn't care if he only earned his board. Frequently he would leave his dinner in the bushes when his dog had caught a woodchuck by the way, and go back a mile and a half to dress it and leave it in the cellar of the house where he boarded after deliberating first for half an hour whether he could not stink it in the pond safely till nightfall. Loving to dwell long upon these themes, he would say as he went by in the morning, quote, "How thick the pigeons are! If working every day were not my trade, I could get all the meat I should want by hunting pigeons, woodchucks, rabbits, partridges, by gosh. I could get all I should want for a week in one day." I bet you could, huh? If you kill all those animals, if you had a gun, you could kill woodchucks, rabbits, you could just keep shooting and shooting and shooting and not eat your vegetables. Do you think we should do that, or eat the beans and veggies and the wild lettuce?
We can do pigeons.
Pigeons? I don't know. He was a skillful chopper, indulged in some flourishes and ornaments in his art. He cut his trees level and close to the ground, but that the sprouts which came up afterwards might be more vigorous, and a sled might slide over the stumps. Instead of leaving a whole tree to support his corded wood, he would pare it away to a slender stake or a splinter which you could break off with your hand at last. Are you going to make coffee? What? Are you? This is our morning coffee readings. Are you? This is more Thoreau about Thoreau mentioned in a Buddhist book. Thoreau is famous worldwide in every culture. Now, this is the songs of the sons and daughters of Buddha. Afterward, I went to the woods because I wanted to live deliberately, wrote Henry David Thoreau in Walden, getting the elemental urge into a few price words. In this age-old human desire lies the attraction of the poems of the theragatha and the therigatha, uttered and or sung or whispered 2,500 years ago by the earliest Buddhist practitioners, women and men indeed, intent on leading lives marked by deliberation. In every culture that has left behind evidence of itself, one finds people to whom the same old hankering comes to live simply, resolutely, with minimal possessions of only the most necessary sort, to pass the time in reflection unharried by the endless round of buying and selling, to live out life on one of those frontiers, spiritual or geographic or both, where philosophy and poetry seem the only languages big enough to accommodate the adventure. This is a book of ancients who went to the woods. 2,500 years ago, extensive tracts of forest covered parts of northern India, particularly the wide, fertile watershed drained by the river Ganges. In contrast to the open plains and farmlands where the sun could be blistering, the forests were cool, breezy, and pleasant. Socially, it was a time of massive dissatisfaction, a burgeoning merchant class drawing on the region's natural resources and trading widely throughout the South Asian subcontinent had helped build the thronging cities of the Gangetic Plain, while cosmopolitan life offered unprecedented opportunity to people relocating to the cities, particularly the freedom found in breaking with the constraints of traditional village life. A recognizable urban malaise had set in. It was the old problem of an expanding economy and the confusion of the values that comes with it, the traditional varna Ashrama system of Brahmanism founded on caste hierarchies and rigid expectations regarding an individual's duties throughout life had a stink of antiquity and irrelevance to it. And religion dominated by imperious priests who demanded cattle for presiding over births, weddings, and initiations and funerals was in many sectors seen as just a dry, rattling, empty formulaic or devoid of spiritual substance. Where could one go for nourishment? We had just read a little bit from Buddhism. It actually has the poems of women, disciples of Buddha. Very nice. We related Henry David Thoreau and his other incarnations and Zen and Buddhism.